The iron throne, the elevator ascended to the 32nd floor in complete silence, save for the soft hum of machinery. Inside, 5 employees stood rigid as statues, their eyes fixed on the digital display counting upward. No one dared speak. No one dared breathe too loudly. They all knew who occupied the corner office at the end of the hall. Marcus Vance had built Pinnacle Marketing. Solutions from a cramped studio apartment into an empire worth $300 million. At 38, he commanded respect through fear, precision, and an unforgiving standards that had crushed more careers than anyone cared to count. His reputation preceded him into every room, whispered warnings about his ice-cold stare, his ability to dissect a presentation in seconds, and his legendary temper that could reduce seasoned executives to tears. The elevator dinged softly as it reached the executive floor. The employees scattered like startled birds, each hurrying to their respective departments. The morning briefing would begin in 20 minutes, and being late meant facing the wrath of a man who viewed punctuality as a moral imperative in his glass-walled office. Marcus reviewed the quarterly reports with surgical precision. His assistant, Rebecca, had learned long ago to simply place documents on his desk and retreat without a word. The numbers looked good, profit margins up, client retention strong, 3 major campaigns launching next month. Yet something nagged at him, a persistent dissatisfaction he couldn't quite identify. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Rebecca peered around the door, her voice barely above a whisper. "The new intern is here for orientation, Mr. Vance. Should I send her to HR?" Marcus glanced up from his papers, his dark eyes sharp behind frameless glasses. "Send her in. I want to see what caliber of candidate the university is sending us these days." Moments later, a young woman entered the office with confident steps. That surprised him. Most people approached his desk as if walking toward their own execution. This one, Nora Chen, according to her file, maintained steady eye contact and offered a firm handshake. "Mr. Vance, thank you for this opportunity. I've been following Pinnacle's work for years, particularly the Henderson campaign last spring. The way you repositioned their brand narrative was brilliant." Marcus studied her carefully. She was, perhaps, 23, with intelligent eyes and an earnestness that reminded him uncomfortably of someone he used to know himself many years ago. Her blazer was well-tailored, but not expensive, and her shoes showed the kind of wear that spoke of long walks and careful budgeting. "Flattery is cheap, Miss Chen. Results are what matter here. You'll be working with the junior creative team on preliminary research and client analysis. The work is demanding, the hours are long, and I have zero tolerance for excuses or mediocrity. Many interns discover they're not cut out for this industry. Are you prepared for that reality?" Nora's smile never wavered. "My mother worked too. Jobs to put me through school, Mr. Vance. She taught me that hard work isn't something to fear, it's something to embrace. I'm here to learn and contribute, not just survive." Something flickered across Marcus's face, too quick to identify. He nodded curtly. "Rebecca will show you to your workstation. The creative team meets at 9 sharp. Don't be late." His office. Marcus found himself watching her through the glass walls. She walked with purpose, greeting other employees with genuine warmth that seemed to catch them off guard. In the hallway, she helped an older man pick up scattered files he'd dropped, laughing at something he said. The man Jim from accounting was actually smiling. Marcus couldn't remember the last time he'd seen Jim smile. The morning briefing proceeded with its usual tension. Department heads presented updates while Marcus dissected every detail, his questions sharp enough to draw blood. The marketing team stumbled through their client progress reports, clearly nervous under his scrutiny. In the back corner, he noticed Nora taking careful notes, her expression thoughtful rather than fearful. When the meeting concluded, employees filed out quickly, eager to escape the pressure. But Nora lingered, approaching the conference table where Marcus was gathering his materials. "Mr. Vance, I noticed the Morrison account presentation seemed to stall during the brand identity discussion. If I may ask, what specific concerns do you have about their current direction?" Marcus paused, genuinely surprised. Most people fled. His presence after meetings, His intern was voluntarily engaging with him about strategy. "The creative team is playing it safe," he said finally. "The concepts lack authenticity. They're chasing trends instead of solving the client's actual problem." Nora nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes fresh eyes can see what experience might overlook. Would you be open to some preliminary research that might offer new perspectives?" For a moment, Marcus saw something in her eyes that he'd forgotten existed in corporate environments: genuine passion for the work itself, not just the paycheck or prestige that came with it. It stirred something uncomfortable in his chest. A memory of the young man who had once stayed up all night crafting the perfect campaign because he believed advertising could actually change the world. "Submit your findings to Rebecca by Friday," he said curtly, then walked away before she could see the uncertainty in his expression. The crack in the arm of the Morrison Industries presentation loomed like a storm cloud over the entire creative department. For 3 weeks, the team had labored under Marcus's exacting demands, producing concept after concept only to watch each one get systematically dismantled in his glass office. The client, a family-owned manufacturing company trying to modernize their image, represented a potential $15 million contract, and everyone knew their jobs depended on getting it right. Nora had spent her evenings in the office long after the cleaning crew left, diving deep into Morrison's history. She discovered something the senior team had missed. The company's founder had started as a single father, building agricultural equipment in his garage while raising 3 children alone. That story of resilience and family values had gotten lost in decades of corporate expansion and sterile marketing speak. On the morning of the presentation, tension crackled through the conference room like electricity before a thunderstorm. Marcus sat at the head of the polished table, his expression unreadable as the creative director. James Patterson nervously shuffled through his slides. The Morrison executive CEO, Patricia Morrison, and her marketing VP sat expectantly, unaware of the drama about to unfold. "Our research indicates that Morrison Industries needs to position itself as an industry innovator," James began, his voice slightly strained. "We're proposing a campaign centered on cutting-edge technology and forward-thinking leadership." Presentation proceeded with glossy renderings of sleek machinery and corporate buzzwords about revolutionary solutions and next-generation thinking. Marcus's fingers drummed silently against the tabella warning sign that made James's voice grow increasingly shaky. Patricia Morrison leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "This looks very modern, but I'm not sure it captures who we really are. As a company, grandfather started Morrison with his hands and his heart. We're not just about technology. We're about the people who depend on what we build." The room fell silent. Marcus's jaw tightened as he prepared to deliver one of his legendary verbal dissections. But before he could speak, Nora cleared her throat from her seat near the back of the room. "Mrs. Morrison, if I may," she said, rising to her feet. Every eye in the room turned toward her, including Marcus's, which had gone dangerously cold. "I think what you're describing is exactly what makes Morrison Industries special, and something we might have overlooked in our initial approach." James shot her a warning look that clearly said, "Sit down and shut up," but Nora continued, her voice gaining strength. "I've been researching your company's history. I discovered that your grandfather, Thomas Morrison, was a widowed father of 3 when he started building farm equipment in his garage. He wasn't trying to revolutionize an industry, he was trying to help his neighbors feed their families. That story of practical innovation born from genuine care, that's your real brand." Marcus's knuckles had gone white as he gripped his pen. No intern, no employee, period, had ever interrupted a client presentation to contradict the approved creative direction. The breach of protocol was so stunning that, for a moment, he couldn't find words. Patricia Morrison, however, had straightened in her chair, her eyes lighting up. "Yes, exactly. That's the Morrison story. We're not trying to be the flashiest or the most high-tech. We're trying to be the most reliable, the most trustworthy. The company that farmers and contractors turn to because they know we understand their challenges, Miss Chen." Marcus's voice cut through the room like a blade. "You're overstepping your weight." Patricia raised her hand, her attention fixed on Nora. "I want to hear more. What would a campaign look like that honored that legacy?" Nora glanced at Marcus, saw the fury in his eyes, and made a choice that would change everything. She walked to the front of the room, her hand steady despite the career-ending risk she was taking. Picture this. Instead of gleaming factories and corporate executives, we show real farmers at dawn, real construction workers solving actual problems. The tagline isn't about innovation, it's about reliability. Morrison Industries, built by hands that understand yours. She pulled out her phone and projected photos she'd gathered weathered hands operating Morrison equipment. Multi-generational farming families, construction crews working through difficult conditions. Every piece of Morrison equipment tells a story about the person using it. A combine harvester that helps a family save their farm during a difficult harvest. An excavator that helps rebuild a community after a flood. This isn't about selling machinery, it's about honoring the dignity of hard work. The room had gone completely still. Patricia Morrison's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Even her marketing VP was nodding slowly, completely absorbed. But Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. Wall he'd built carefully over years of corporate battles and personal disappointments. This intern, this young woman who reminded him uncomfortably of his own forgotten idealism, had just articulated everything he'd lost along his climb to success. The ability to see the human story behind the business case. The passion for work that meant something beyond profit margins. "Mrs. Morrison," Marcus said finally, his voice carefully controlled, "I think Miss Chen has identified some valuable insights. Perhaps we should schedule a follow-up meeting to explore this direction more thoroughly." After the clients left, the conference room emptied quickly. Everyone could sense the storm brewing between Marcus and Nora. When they were alone, he turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "That was either the most brilliant presentation I've ever witnessed," he said quietly, "or the most spectacular. Case of career suicide. I haven't decided which." Nora met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Vance, I know I broke protocol, but sometimes the right thing and the safe thing aren't the same thing." Marcus studied her for a long moment, seen something in her eyes that he'd almost forgotten existed, the belief that work could be about more than winning, that success could be measured in more than dollars. "My office. Tomorrow morning? 7 a.m. We need to discuss your future here." As he walked away, Marcus felt the crack in his armor widen just a little more. Echoes of the past Marcus arrived at the office before dawn, as he had every day for the past 15 years. The empty building felt different in these quiet hours, less like a battlefield, more like the sanctuary it had once been when he'd worked. Alone, fueled by nothing but coffee and the belief that he could change the world one campaign at a time, he stood at his office window, watching the city wake up below, and allowed himself to remember. 20 years ago, he'd been Marcus Vance. From South Detroit, the scholarship kid at Northwestern who wore the same 3 shirts in rotation and survived on ramen noodles and determination. His first job had been at a tiny agency where the coffee machine was broken more often than it worked. But where every project felt like it mattered, the transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been gradual, like erosion each betrayal. By a business partner, each client who chose flashy over substance, each talented employee who left for competitors had added another layer of protective ice around his heart. Success had demanded sacrifices. And Marcus had convinced himself that compassion was a luxury he couldn't afford. A soft knock interrupted his reverie. Nora stood in the doorway, punctual despite the early hour, carrying 2 coffee cups and wearing the same determined expression that had captivated the Morrison executives. "I brought coffee," she said simply, setting 1 cup on his desk. "I wasn't sure how you liked it, so I brought it black. You can add whatever you want." Marcus almost smiled at the metaphor, then caught himself. "Sit down, Miss Chen. We need to discuss yesterday." But instead of the termination speech he'd planned, Marcus found himself studying her face. There was something familiar about her quiet confidence, her willingness to risk everything for what she believed was right. It reminded him of someone. He'd tried very hard to forget himself, before the world had taught him that idealism was a liability. "Tell me about your background," he said instead. Nora settled into the chair across from his desk, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup. My mother immigrated from Taiwan when I was 5. She worked as a seamstress during the day and cleaned offices at night. I used to do homework in empty conference rooms while she vacuumed around me. She paused, looking out the window at the awakening city. I learned about business by watching her navigate to different worlds, the factory where she was invisible, and the corporate offices where she was ignored. She taught me that real strength isn't about making people fear you. It's about making them believe in something bigger than themselves. Marcus felt that uncomfortable crack in his chest widen further. And what do you believe in, Miss Chen? I believe that advertising, at its best, tells true stories. It connects people to something authentic. Yesterday, when Mrs. Morrison talked about her grandfather, I saw the real Morrison Industries, not the company trying to compete with giants, but the one that never forgot where it came from. Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent message. Rebecca's voice came through the intercom. Mr. Vance, we have a situation. The Henderson account is threatening to pull their contract. They're meeting with Peterson and Associates this afternoon. Henderson Industries had been Pinnacle's flagship client for 3 years, representing nearly 30% of their annual revenue. Marcus felt his old instincts kick in: damage control, aggressive retention strategies, whatever it took to win. But as he reached for his phone to call an emergency meeting, he noticed Nora's thoughtful expression. "What are you thinking?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. "Permission to speak freely?" When Marcus nodded, she continued. "I've been reviewing the Henderson files. Their satisfaction scores have been declining for 8 months, but no one wanted to tell you because ... chode. She hesitated, because they were afraid of my reaction, Marcus finished. The account team has been so focused on impressing you that they stopped listening to what Henderson actually needed. The client feels like a number, not a partner." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying this young woman who seemed determined to hold up an uncomfortable mirror to his leadership style. "And what would you suggest?" "Let me talk to them." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus's first instinct was to laugh at the audacity. Sending an intern to salvage their most important client relationship was professional suicide. But something in Nora's eyes stopped him. It was the same unwavering confidence she'd shown with Morrison. The same belief that authenticity could triumph over corporate maneuvering. "Miss Chen, if you're wrong about this, it won't just cost you your internship. It could destroy this company. And if I'm right?" Marcus found himself remembering the young man who had once cold-called CEOs from his studio apartment. Armed with nothing but passion and the unshakable belief that he could solve their problems better than anyone else. When had he stopped trusting that instinct? When had he started leading through fear instead of inspiration? "1 hour," he said finally. "What hour with Henderson's team? But I'm coming with you." The drive to Henderson Industries felt like stepping back in time. Instead of arriving in his usual armor of expensive suits and intimidation tactics, Marcus found himself listening as Nora outlined her approach, a presentation designed to dazzle, but a conversation designed to understand. Henderson's CEO, Robert Henderson, greeted them with barely concealed frustration. "Marcus, I'll be honest. We've been partners for 3 years, but lately, it feels like you're more interested in winning awards than solving our problems." Before Marcus could launch into his standard defense, Nora spoke up. "Mr. Henderson, you're absolutely right. And that's on us. We lost sight of what matters: your success, not our ego." For the next 45 minutes, Nora did something Marcus hadn't seen in years. She listened. Really listened. She asked questions about Henderson's challenges, their goals, their fears about the changing market. She took notes not for a presentation, but for understanding, and slowly Marcus watched Robert Henderson's posture change. His defensive crossed arms relaxed. His voice softened. By the end of the meeting, he was sharing concerns he'd never mentioned to the account team. Talking about opportunities he'd been afraid to pursue. "I'll be honest," Henderson said as they prepared to leave. "This is the first time in months that I feel like someone from Pinnacle actually cares about our business, not just our budget." On the drive back, Marcus and Nora rode in contemplative silence. Finally, Marcus spoke. "How did you know that would work?" "Because I've been on the other side," Nora replied. I've watched my mother deal with people who saw her as a problem, to be solved instead of a person, to be understood. The best leaders I've observed don't try to impress people, they try to serve them. Marcus pulled into the parking garage and turned off the engine, but neither of them moved to get out. For the first time in years, Marcus felt something he'd forgotten existed, the possibility that there might be a different way to lead, a path that didn't require building walls around his heart. Miss Cheney said quietly, "I think it's time." We had a longer conversation about the future of this company. The transformation 3 weeks after the Henderson meeting, the atmosphere at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions had begun to shift in ways that made longtime employees whisper in break rooms and exchange bewildered glances. Marcus Vance, the man who had ruled through fear for over a decade, was asking questions instead of issuing ultimatums. He was listening to junior staff members. Most shocking of all, he had been seen smiling, actually smiling, during creative reviews. The change hadn't gone unnoticed by the board of directors. Victoria Sterling, Pinnacle's lead investor and board chair, sat across from Marcus in the executive conference room, her silver hair pulled back severely and her expression radiating disapproval. Beside her, board members Thomas Blackwell and David Morisano, relation to the client, flanked her like corporate bodyguards. "Marcus, we need to discuss your recent ... management approach," Victoria said, her voice carrying the chill of old money and older prejudices. "Several department heads have expressed concern about your, shall we say, softer stance with employees." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying the 3 faces that had once intimidated him into compliance. Softer. "Our client retention is up 18% this quarter. Employee satisfaction scores have improved for the first time in 5 years. The Morrison campaign we're developing has generated more positive buzz than anything we've done in the past 2 years. How exactly is success a problem?" Thomas Blackwell cleared his throat, his jowls quivering with indignation. "It's about maintaining proper hierarchy, Marcus. Employees need to know their place. Is it intern of yours, Chun? Is it? It's been seen giving input in senior level meetings. It's inappropriate. Nora Chen has contributed more valuable insights in 3 months than some senior staff have provided in 3 years," Marcus replied, his voice carrying a steel edge that reminded everyone present why he'd built this company from nothing. Victoria's smile was razor thin. "Marcus, we appreciate your experimentation, but Pinnacle's success has been built on strong leadership and clear boundaries. We can't have junior employees thinking they can challenge established protocols. And what if those protocols are wrong?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus saw the board members exchange glances, the kind of silent communication that had once made him fall into line. But something fundamental had changed in him. The approval of these 3 people, which had once felt essential to his sense of worth, now seemed less important than the respect he'd begun to see in his employees' eyes. David Morrison leaned forward, his voice patronizing. "Marcus, you're obviously under stress. Perhaps you should consider taking a sabbatical. Let the senior management team handle operations for a while." The threat was clear, but unspoken. Marcus could feel the familiar rage building, the same fury that had driven him to work 18-hour days and crush anyone who stood in his way. But before he could respond, there was a soft knock on the conference room door. Nora entered, carrying a folder, her expression apologetic but determined. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Vance, but the Morrison Industries presentation has been moved. Up to this afternoon, Mrs. Morrison wants to see the revised campaign before their board meeting tomorrow." Victoria's eyes narrowed as she studied Nora. "Miss Chen, isn't it? We were just discussing your role here at Pinnacle." "I hope I've been helpful," Nora replied evenly, seeming to sense the tension in the room, but not retreating from it. "You've certainly made an impression," Victoria said, her smile predatory. "Tell me, do you think it's appropriate for an intern to contradict senior leadership in front of clients?" Marcus started to intervene, but Nora stepped forward slightly, her chin raised. "Mrs. Sterling, I think it's appropriate to do whatever serves the client's best interests, regardless of who suggests it. Good ideas don't care about hierarchy." The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas Blackwell's face had gone red, and David Morrison looked like he'd swallowed something sour. but Victoria Sterling's expression was the most dangerous, calculating, and cold. Refreshing, Victoria said finally. Such idealism. Sure, you'll learn, in time, that business is about more than good ideas. It's about maintaining order, respect, and proper chains of command. With respect, Mrs. Sterling, Nora replied, I've watched companies that prioritized order over innovation. Most of them don't exist anymore. After Nora left to prepare for the Morrison presentation, Victoria turned back to Marcus with renewed intensity. That young woman is a problem, Marcus. He's undermining the very foundation of corporate structure. If you can't control your staff, perhaps we need someone who can. Marcus felt a moment of vertigo as if he were standing at the edge of a cliff. On one side lay the familiar path corporate politics, fear-based management, the approval of powerful people who mistook control for leadership. On the other side lay something he'd almost forgotten existed, the possibility of building something meaningful, of leading through inspiration rather than intimidation. Victoria, he said quietly, when did we start measuring success by how well we could make people afraid instead of how well we could help them succeed? The board meeting ended in tense stalemate, but Marcus knew the real battle was just beginning. That afternoon, the Morrison presentation went flawlessly. Patricia Morrison and her team were so enthusiastic about the authentic campaign Nora had inspired that they signed a 3-year extension on the spot, with a bonus clause that would add millions to Pinnacle's revenue. But the victory felt hollow. When Marcus returned to his office to find an email from Victoria Sterling scheduling an emergency board meeting for the following Monday, the subject line was ominous: leadership review and strategic realignment. That evening, Marcus found himself staying late again, but for different reasons than in the past. Instead of reviewing profit margins and efficiency reports, he was reading employee feedback surveys and client satisfaction scores. The data told a story that surprised him: the small changes he'd implemented, the willingness to listen rather than dictate. It created a ripple effect throughout the entire organization. Nora knocked on his door around 7 p.m., carrying takeout containers and wearing the same determined expression that had first caught his attention. Thought you might be hungry, she said, setting food on his desk. Rebecca mentioned you missed lunch. You don't need to take care of me, Miss Chen, Marcus said, but his voice lacked its usual edge. I'm not taking care of you, Nora replied, settling into the chair across from his desk. I'm investing in the future of this company. Based on what I overheard in the hallway, that future might be in jeopardy. Marcus looked up from his computer, seeing something in her eyes that reminded him why he'd taken the risk of changing his approach in the first place. The board thinks I've lost my edge. They think I'm being too soft, too collaborative. They want the old Marcus back. And what do you want? It was such a simple question, but Marcus realized no one had asked him that in years. Everyone assumed they knew what he wanted: more power, more money, more control. But sitting in his office, looking at this young woman who had somehow managed to crack through walls he'd spent decades building, Marcus discovered the answer surprised even him. I want to build something that matters, he said finally, something that people can be proud of, not just afraid of. Nora smiled, and for the first time in weeks, Marcus felt like the choice ahead of him might not destroy everything he'd worked for. It might just save it. The phoenix rising the boardroom felt like a courtroom on Monday morning. Victoria Sterling had arrived early, flanked by her allies and armed with documentation that painted Marcus's leadership changes as a dangerous deviation from proven corporate strategy. The other board members sat in careful neutrality, waiting to see which way the wind would blow before choosing sides. Marcus entered precisely at 9, followed by Rebecca, carrying a presentation folder. But instead of taking his usual seat at the head of the table, he remained standing, his expression calm but resolute. Before we begin, Marcus said, his voice carrying a quiet authority that made everyone sit up straighter, I want to share some numbers with you. Hugh gestured to Rebecca, who distributed copies of the quarterly report. Client retention is up 22%. Employee turnover is down 35%. Our net promoter score with clients has improved by 40 points. Most importantly, we just landed the Meridian Healthcare account, the largest contract in Pinnacle's history. Victoria's carefully prepared opening statement faltered as board members murmured over the impressive figures. But she recovered quickly, her voice sharp with accusation. Numbers can be manipulated, Marcus. What concerns us is the long-term stability of your leadership approach. Employees who don't respect authority become more innovative, more committed, and more willing to go above and beyond for their clients, Marcus interrupted smoothly. Victoria, you're absolutely right that leadership has changed at Pinnacle. It's become less about commanding fear and more about inspiring excellence. The door opened, and Nora entered quietly, carrying a laptop and wireless microphone. Marcus had asked her to prepare something for this moment, but even he wasn't sure what she had planned. "If I may," Nora said, addressing the room with the same confidence she'd shown with Morrison Industries, "I'd like to show you what modern leadership actually looks like." She connected her laptop to the room's display system, and suddenly the screen filled with a video montage. It showed Pinnacle employees talking candidly about their work experience over the past few months, not scripted testimonials, but genuine. Conversations about feeling heard, valued, and motivated. James Patterson, the creative director who had once stammered through presentations, spoke confidently about how collaborative brainstorming had unlocked his team's best work. Rebecca described the relief of working for someone who trusted her judgment rather than micromanaged her decisions. Even maintenance staff talked about feeling like valued members of the SHM's family rather than invisible service providers. But the most powerful moment came when Patricia Morrison appeared on screen. Speaking directly to the camera, in 30 years of business, I've worked with dozens of agencies. Pinnacle, under Marcus Vance's new leadership, isn't just different, it's what every company should aspire to become. They don't just work for us, they believe in what we're building together. The video ended with footage from the previous week's all-hands meeting, where Marcus had done something unprecedented. He had publicly acknowledged his past mistakes, apologized for the culture of fear he'd created, and committed to a new approach based on mutual respect and shared purpose. The boardroom fell silent. Several members were visibly moved, while Victoria Sterling's face had gone ashen with rage. "This is exactly the problem," she said, her voice trembling with barely controlled fury. "Marcus, you've turned this company into a therapy session instead of a business. Emotional decision-making, collaborative nonsense, treating employees like equals it's a recipe for disaster." "No," said a new voice from the doorway. Robert Henderson stood there, flanked by two other major clients who had requested to attend the meeting. "It's a recipe for the kind of partnership that builds generational business relationships." Henderson entered the room with the confidence of someone who controlled significant revenue streams. "Victoria, I've known you for 15 years, and I respect your business acumen. But if you force Marcus back into his old management style, Henderson Industries will terminate our contract immediately, and I suspect we won't be alone." The second client, CEO of Meridian Healthcare, nodded agreement. "We specifically chose Pinnacle because of what they've become, not what they used to be. The collaborative approach, the authentic leadership, that's what we want to partner with." Victoria's carefully constructed power play was crumbling around her. She looked around the table at board members who were now studying the quarterly reports with genuine interest rather than skeptical dismissal. "Thomas." Blackwell cleared his throat nervously. Perhaps we've been too hasty in our concerns. These results are quite impressive. Impressive enough to justify a new direction," added David Morrison, his earlier hostility replaced by pragmatic acceptance of undeniable success. Marcus felt a moment of triumph, but it was tempered by something unexpected, not the ruthless satisfaction of defeating enemies, but genuine sadness for people who had never learned that leadership could be about more than winning and losing. "Victoria," he said gently, "this company has room for everyone who's willing to grow with us. The question isn't whether we're going to change, we already have. The question is whether you want to be part of building something remarkable." 3 months later, Pinnacle Marketing Solutions was featured on the cover of Industry Leader magazine as the agency that redefined corporate culture. The article detailed their transformation from a fear-based hierarchy to a collaborative powerhouse, with particular attention to the role of mentorship and authentic leadership in driving both innovation and profitability. Marcus stood in the break room, something he never would have done in his old life, watching nor facilitate a brainstorming session with junior staff members. She had been promoted to Associate Creative Director, the youngest person ever to hold that position at Pinnacle. But more importantly, she had become the cultural bridge between Marcus's executive vision and the daily reality of every employee. "Proud of your protege?" Rebecca asked, joining him with 2 cups of coffee. "She was never my protege," Marcus replied, accepting the coffee with a smile that had become natural rather than strategic. "She was my teacher. I just took a while to realize it." The office around them hummed with productive energy, not the frantic tension of fear-driven productivity, but the sustainable rhythm of people who believed in their work and trusted their leadership. Client presentations had become collaborative conversations. Employee reviews focused on growth rather than criticism. The company's success metrics had improved across every category that mattered, but perhaps the most significant change was visible in the executive bathroom mirror each morning, where Marcus saw a man who had remembered how to lead with his heart as well as his head. The transformation hadn't been easy. Some board members had resigned. Few senior staff couldn't adapt to the new culture. There were still days when the old patterns of thinking tried to reassert themselves, but every morning brought new evidence that authentic leadership wasn't just morally right, it was strategically superior. Clients stayed longer, employees worked harder, and the company's reputation attracted the best talent in the industry. Victoria Sterling had eventually resigned from the board, but not before offering Marcus a grudging acknowledgement. "You proved me wrong, Marcus. Still don't understand it, but I can't argue with the results." As the workday wound down, Marcus found himself doing something that would have seemed impossible a year ago, leaving the office at a reasonable hour, confident that his team could handle whatever challenges arose. Trust he had learned was not just a leadership tool, but a multiplier of human potential. Walking toward the elevator, he passed Nora's office and saw her mentoring the newest intern, a young man who reminded Marcus of himself at that age, hungry, idealistic, and uncertain whether the corporate world had room for his authentic self. Marcus smiled, remembering the scared young man he had once been and the hardened executive he had become, and finally, the leader he had chosen to be. The transformation of Pinnacle Marketing Solutions would be his legacy, but the transformation of Marcus Vance from a ruler to a servant leader would be his greatest achievement. The phoenix had indeed risen, not from the ashes of destruction, but from the courage to become something better than what success had made him. And in teaching others to lead with both strength and compassion, Marcus had discovered that the most powerful leadership lesson wasn't about commanding respect, was about earning it, one authentic interaction at a time.